On the program, peace, security, and economic recovery plans remains the focus of U.S.-Africa Summit in Washington, D.C., United States. President Buhari meets U.S. President Biden, both countries committed in enhancing relations. India and China become the largest buyers of Russian oil, despite Western nations' sanctions on Russia. These are the major stories we'll be looking at on this episode of the program, Global Update. This is a program that brings you up to speed with stories from around the world that made the headlines in the course of the week. I am Patricia Esemilova. Welcome to the program. President Muhammadu Buhari has restated Nigeria's commitment toward accelerating efforts at ending conflicts and consolidating the nexus between peace, security, good governance, and socio-economic development on the continent. Speaking at a high-level session on Agenda 2063 as part of the U.S.-Africa Leaders Summit, the president described as encouraging the efforts at implementing the African Union's strategic vision for a peaceful and secured Africa.
It is a high-level session on Agenda 2063 convened by President Joe Biden to declare total support of the United States for its blueprint aimed at building an integrated, prosperous and peaceful Africa as an indispensable global partner.
Our hope is to build together this partnership on a more solid and confident nature for progress and shared prosperity for our people.
In his address, President Muhammadu Buhari expressed worry over the increasing, diverse and complex threats of climate change, terrorism, violent extremism, transnational organized crimes, and recently, the unconstitutional changes of government in Africa. He said unless these negative developments that impact national, regional, and continental stability are effectively contained, efforts at achieving Agenda 2063 will remain a tall order. The president therefore tasked leaders to recommit themselves in unity and solidarity to uphold constitutionalism as well as embrace a multidimensional approach towards achieving peace, security, and sustainable development in line with their strategic vision for the continent, while reiterating his commitment to credible, transparent, and violence-free 2023 elections. President Buhari told his colleagues that no matter what gains they make without good governance anchored on free and fair elections, development efforts on the continent will remain futile and their citizenry would be worse off. Earlier in his opening address, President Joe Biden said the United States is committed to helping African countries access the financing they need towards building sustainable and inclusive economies as part of what he called the forward-looking 21st century partnership between the United States and Africa.
That's why over the next 3 years, we plan to commit $55 billion in Africa to advance the priorities we share and to support the Agenda 2063. That number represents a comprehensive commitment from the United States to invest in Africa's people, Africa's infrastructure, Africa's agriculture, Africa's health system, Africa's security, and more.
While announcing the full support of the United States to reforming the United Nations Security Council to include permanent representation for Africa, President Biden also invites the African Union to join the G20 as a permanent member.
President Joe Biden of the United States said improving Africa's infrastructure is central to his administration's vision of building a stronger global economy that can better withstand the kind of shocks witnessed in the past few years. Consequently, the president announced a $350 billion investment package for what he called Digital Transformation with Africa initiative aimed at ensuring that people across the continent participate actively in digital economy. This was while addressing the U.S.-Africa Business Forum as part of the ongoing Leaders Summit in Washington, D.C.
My administration's engagement with Africa and the priority we place on these relationships began on day one. Because when Africa succeeds, the United States succeeds. Quite frankly, the whole world succeeds as well.
The U.S.-Africa Business Forum, attended by President Muhammadu Buhari and dozens of other heads of state and government, has as its theme, Partnering for a Prosperous and Resilient Future. It is aimed at advancing two-way trade and investment partnerships that bolster Africa's role in the global economy, scale innovation and entrepreneurship, as well as drive advancements in critical economic sectors.
Together, we want to build a future of opportunity where no one is left behind. Today, I'm announcing that the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation is investing nearly $370 million in new projects, $100 million to increase the reliable, clean energy for millions of people in sub-Saharan Africa, $20 million to provide financing for fertilizer to help smallholder farmers, particularly women farmers, increase the yields of their crops, $10 million to support small and medium-sized enterprises that help bring clean drinking water to communities all across the continent.
Africa's economic transition, President Biden said, depends largely on good governance, healthy populations, and reliable as well as affordable energy. And the United States is committed to supporting every aspect of inclusive growth on the continent.
The United States is signing a historic memorandum of understanding with the new African Continental Free Trade Area Secretariat. This MOU will unlock new opportunities for trade and investment between our countries and bring Africa and the United States even closer than ever. This is an enormous opportunity for Africa's future, and the United States wants to help make those opportunities real. 1.3 billion people and a continent-wide market totaling $3.4 trillion.
During the forum, attended by business leaders from across the United States and Africa, several deals were signed as a concrete proof of an enduring commitment towards cementing new kind of partnerships between the United States and Africa that will spur shared success.
I think the U.S.'s focus has been on moving the relationship with the continent from one of aid to one of trade, and then moving from trade to investment. And today they announced a $300 billion commitment via the IDC, which has been restructured, and now they want to make equity investments across the world with a big focus on Africa because of the opportunities. I think that we must commend our President Muhammadu Buhari, who has led a solid initiative to project the country on the international stage, and that's a big plus. And I think with initiatives of this nature, when the commitments the U.S. is making materialize into actual investments into the continent, Nigeria will get a large share of those investments. Afrexim today signed a $500 million commitment. African Finance Corporation, which is also Nigeria-based, also signed a $500 million commitment. So at least, when it's not just a talk show, people are walking away from here with bankable documents in their hands, and we are looking forward to the deployment of these funds.
Similarly, U.S. President Joe Biden has expressed absolute confidence in the ability of President Muhammadu Buhari to supervise the conduct of free, fair, credible elections in 2023. At a strategic meeting with the leaders of 6 African countries facing elections next year, the U.S. leader particularly lauded President Buhari for demonstrating high sense of commitment to constitutionally in Nigeria's democratic enterprise.
He singled out Nigeria and Mr. President for praise. These countries have their representatives, their ambassadors in Nigeria, and who are seeing that, Mr. President has never sought to interfere or to manipulate elections and election results. And of course, this has been seen in the recent past with governorship elections, in which the ruling party candidates have not won, And, you know, and Mr. President has welcomed those results and, you know, as the people speaking. And I think the international community now recognizes that he really is a democrat, not just in words, but in action. It's a recognition of the legacy of Mr. President, which is a non-interference in the electoral processes, and that votes will count and count decisively.
President Biden told the African leaders that his administration is prepared to do everything it can towards supporting the forthcoming elections in their countries being free, fair, and credible.
President Biden, I think, you know, was talking about enabling environment for democracy to flourish. Things like education, health, and all those quality of life, you know, issues that contributes to, you know, a society being prosperous and therefore able to make the democracy thrive, and you know, job creation, and you know, just the economic support and other aspects, and so he feels that in those areas where the U.S. can you know, can support, that they certainly would you know, would do so.
Let's pause for a break. We'll be back with more reports. Ghana is in quest of restructuring its debt and strengthening its social safety net to restore its economic stability. This came as Ghana's inflation reached more than 40% in October, the highest it has been since July 2001. To proffer solution to the economic hardship facing the country, the International Monetary Fund, IMF, has agreed to a $3 billion loan to Ghana to get the West African nation's debt under control, restore financial stability, and help people most at risk from rising prices and other economic problems. Ghana is facing more than 40% inflation, growing debt, and a sharp decline in its cedi currency since the start of the year.
A deal 6 months in the making. A team of IMF agents giving a preliminary green light to a 3-year, $3 billion bailout to Ghana. But this loan comes with strings attached, hinging on an economic reform program that tackles some of the deep challenges facing the nation.
It includes reforms to ensure the sustainability of public finances. And to do so, the government will implement policies that lead to a reduction in the fiscal deficit by enhancing domestic revenue mobilization and by streamlining spending.
Inflation in Ghana is more than 40%, and according to the central bank, debt was nearly $38 billion in September and growing. Part of the restructuring plan would see investors lose their interest payments and extend the maturity of their bonds.
The eventual conclusion of the program will assist us in our efforts to restore stability, tackle inflation, and strengthen our currency. That is why the various ingredients of the program should be supported by all Ghanaians and all stakeholders.
But some labor unions in Ghana are resisting the domestic debt restructuring program. They have urged the government not to include pension funds of public sector workers in the debt exchange program. The government is also yet to outline its plans for the country's external debts as it implements the domestic debt restructuring program.
Still in Ghana, Speaker, Parliament of Ghana has advocated peer review of parliamentary activities in Africa in order to bridge existing gaps for effective legislations. He said this during his visit to the National Institute for Legislative and Democratic Studies, NILDS.
The speaker, who had earlier visited the National Assembly Service Commission, was at the institute to appraise the working system of the National Assembly. He noted that from his 30 years in the Parliament of Ghana, he has observed gaps in their system, which has prompted his visit to Nigeria for possible change.
Getting this opportunity of being the speaker, I thought it wise to at least utilize what the nation has invested in me by correcting some of these things I think were not normal and positioning the institution of Parliament in a better state to be able to serve the country and the people.
To help us and them to move Ghana and Nigeria in parliamentary and assembly matters forward in this century.
The Director General of the Institute noted that every parliament in Africa needs a supportive institute like NIDS to nurture the legislative and democratic structures of the country, which he said explains the bed of needs in Nigeria.
How do we deliver in terms of lawmaking? How do we deliver in terms of representations? How do we deliver in terms of oversight? How do we ensure that the carpenter, the bricklayer, the professor that are being elected into the parliament gets, exposed to the rudiment of legislations?
Meanwhile, the academic staff of the institute have undergone a special training to address core areas of need, the global environment of knowledge for effective service at the institute.
We appreciate you for the strong collaboration and support, as well as for your self-understanding of adhering to the principle of lifelong learning.
There is no limit to knowledge. You constantly have to develop yourself.
Training starts from cradle to grave. In fact, it is training that makes a person who he is.
The training is the third for researchers at NIDS since 2019 and the fourth in the series.
And in our next session, African leaders, including former Kenyan President Uhuru Kenyatta, witnessed the ceasefire agreement between DRC Congo's government and the rebels group during the recent peace talks in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi. Thousands of the citizens fled in their homes in eastern Congo to neighboring countries as a result of impasse between the warring parties. However, negotiations in recent meetings aims to outline subsequent meetings and ascertain progress made.
In the Kenyan capital Nairobi, the Democratic Republic of Congo's government and armed rebel groups have agreed to a ceasefire in the latest round of peace talks. The talks involve the current presidents of Kenya, Burundi, the DRC, Rwanda, and Uganda, as well as former Kenya President Uhuru Kenyatta, who acted as the facilitator of the peace process. Representatives of armed groups in the DRC were also present. All parties signed agreements on a raft of key issues, including a ceasefire and allowing emergency humanitarian relief to reach the conflict-affected areas. Kenyatta said 2 follow-up meetings will be held in the DRC cities of Goma and Bunia next month, which will assess the progress of the new agreements and begin engagements on the medium and long-term peace agenda. The M23 rebel group, which had been leading an offensive in the eastern DRC, was not represented in the talks, but says it's ready to withdraw from occupied territory and will support regional peacemaking efforts. The conflicts between the DRC government forces and the M23 group have displaced hundreds of thousands of residents in the eastern part of the country. The UN says some 680,000 people are in need of humanitarian assistance.
India and China gradually becoming the largest buyers of Russian oil as Western nations restrict purchases and impose sanctions. Here is the report.
Russian oil imports are significantly changing bilateral trade figures between the two countries. Between January and April 2022, trade reached $6.4 billion, twice as much as the same period last year. Along with that, June saw a record of around 950,000 barrels per day being traded from Russia to India, an indication that this year could set new benchmarks for bilateral trade between the two. India imports 80% of its energy demands and is the world's third largest consumer of crude oil. Much like other countries, internationally higher crude prices have been the driving force behind inflation. And discounted oil from Russia has been welcomed to lower import bills as well as curtail a surge in prices. But with Russian banks pushed out of dollar-based payment systems, settling accounts has posed a challenge. In an important development, India's central bank has allowed the country's traders to settle imports and exports via rupees. Experts feel this move will greatly aid India's growing imports of Russian oil. Russian officials have said that they expect bilateral trade with India to reach $19 billion by the end of 2022. And while India has clearly prioritized its energy security, this mutually beneficial relationship with Russia may put its diplomacy with the United States on a slippery slope.
In the meantime, Nigeria's Vice President Yemi Osinbajo within the week hosted the 2022 annual Christmas concert at the presidential villa with sonorous voices, thrilling instrumentals and inspiring ministries all coming together in celebrations of the festive season at the carol event themed Messiah. The report.
Through the praise from the mouth of babies and infants, you have established a stronghold against the enemies to silence the foe and the avenger. This is according to Psalm 8, verse 2. At this Christmas carol, everyone is let loose to render praise and thanksgiving and honor to God for the birth of Jesus Christ. Besides the Vice President and his wife, there are many other dignitaries at the event. In his message titled The Messiah and the Encounter That Transforms Lives, the Primate of the Anglican Communion, Nigeria, the Most Reverend Henry Ndukuba, noted that Jesus Christ, who is the center of history, renews mankind's hope and faith in eternal life.
For unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and the government will be upon his shoulder, and his name will be called Wonderful, Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace.
The significance of this concert is to reawaken in our minds, in our being, in our consciousness, the fact that our Savior Jesus Christ indeed was born, indeed is alive, indeed he reigns, and indeed is there for us to continue to reach out to him and call upon him, because the Bible says, call upon me and I will answer. And when we have concert like this, we are reminding ourselves that we can call upon God. God is only a call away, not with our mobile phones, but just on our knees. And every time we sing, he's there with us.
Music ministration were from various invited guest artists and groups across the country. The Christmas concert at the Presidential Villa is an annual event hosted during the festive season by either a sitting president or the vice president.
Here are other reports that made the headlines in the course of the week under review.
The United Nations Migration Agency says bodies of 27 migrants believed to have died of thirst have been found in the Chadian desert. According to reports, the migrants reportedly left Mosoro, a crossroad town in west-central Chad, 17 months ago in a pickup truck. It is believed that the truck got lost in the deep desert, broke down due to mechanic issues, and the migrants died of thirst. Chad currently hosts about 300,000 refugees in 17 refugee camps and 160,000 internally displaced persons in the eastern and southern parts of the country. The forced migration has been caused mainly by conflict and general insecurity in western Sudan, eastern Chad, and parts of the Central African Republic. Food insecurity, failed harvest, and inconsistent rains were said to have impacted migration patterns. Now elsewhere, according to diplomats and Myanmar rights groups, a top United Nations committee has blocked Myanmar's military, which grabbed power in the February 2021 coup, from taking the country's seat at the United Nations. The body's General Assembly Credentials Committee deferred action on the military's request to take over the seat as the Myanmar Accountability Project said in a statement that it has also learned from diplomats that the committee, which began meeting on November 29, had rejected the generous bid for representation.
That concludes this week's episode of the program Global Update. I hope to see you again, same time next week for a fresh package. I will leave you with this food for thought that says, courage is what makes you stand and talk, and it is courage that makes you sit and listen. Till then, I remain Patricia A. Samiluwa saying bye for now.